There are two metal doors in the floor of my barn. I didn't put them there. I don't know exactly when they went in or who put them there. I found them 6 months ago, and I've been trying to decide what to do about what I found ever since. I think I'm running out of time to say it. My name is Walt Harlan. I'm 44. My family has farmed this land for 3 generations. My grandfather cleared it. My father Gerald ran it for 40 years, and when Gerald died 2 years ago, the place came to me. I stayed. Not because I'd planned for it, because leaving would have meant 80 years of Harlans on this ground added up to nothing, and I couldn't make myself do that. The farm is in bad shape. The tractor is a 98 that needs more than I can give it. 3rd time I've bled the hydraulic lines this year, and the lift arm has started dropping slow on cold mornings. The barn roof has been slow leaking for 3 years. I patch one section and the water finds another 2 weeks later, 3 feet over, like it's testing the boundary. The porch boards on the east end have gone soft enough that I've taped them off with orange tape and walk around them every morning. There is always a list. The list is always longer than the day. Gerald's truck is still in the barn, a 94 Ford F-150, dark green, backed against the north wall with the nose pointing out, the way he always parked it. There's a crack in the driver's side windshield that was there when he was alive and has grown another inch each winter since. His shape is still in the bench seat from 40 years of the same posture, the left side worn lower where he sat, the headrest cracked at the center seam, the steering wheel glossed smooth from 40 years of his hands at 10 and 2. I walk past it every morning when I come in to get tools. I keep telling myself I'll deal with it when I'm ready. I found the cameras on a Tuesday in March. The leak in the barn roof had moved again. The stain on the boards had shifted east, which meant the entry point had moved, which meant I needed to find it before the rain coming in 2 days. To get to the section, I needed to check. I had to move hay bales I'd stacked in the northeast corner 3 years back and hadn't touched since. The barn in March smells like old hay and cold clay, and the dry iron smell that comes up from the ground in early spring before the soil has warmed. The hay had been there long enough to go dense and slightly dusty at the surface. The kind of bale that sheds a fine grit when you grab it, gets into the back of your throat. I've been walking into that smell my whole life. It doesn't register until it changes. I started moving bales. Heavier than I remembered. They always are after sitting, the bottom ones especially, where the weight has compressed the hay down to something close to solid. I moved 8 or 9, stacking them to the side, and looked up to gauge the angle of the roof boards. A glint in the rafters, half a second. Gone. I put the bale down, shifted my position, and looked up more carefully, trying to replicate the angle. A camera, mounted in the main beam 20 feet overhead. Small and compact, painted a dark weathered gray close enough to aged fur that it read as shadow from below unless you were specifically looking for it. Set into the housing of an old electrical fixture that had been up in those rafters longer than I'd been alive. Angled downward, toward the floor. I kept looking, 3 of them, all northeast side, all pointed at the same section of floor, a 6x4 patch directly below where I'd been stacking hay for 3 years. No brand markings, no model numbers, nothing. The cables ran along the underside of the beams, following the natural lines of the structure, fastened with clips that had been painted over so many times they'd nearly become part of the wood. Where the cables bent around corners, they were seated into notches cut into the beam edge, shallow, tidy, the kind of work done by someone who intended it to last and intended it not to be found. They fed into a junction box on the east wall. From there, a conduit ran through the wall to the exterior. I went outside. Low on the south wall, half buried under an elderberry that had grown up and around it over years, a cellular relay unit. Heavy-duty weatherproof model permanently mounted on a steel bracket that had been lag-bolted directly into the studs. The elderberry had grown over the bracket's top edge and around the left side, the bark pressed flat against it, conforming to its shape the way wood does when it grows against something that won't move. I reached through the branches and found it by feel. Cold metal and rubber seals. I found the indicator panel, pressed through the branches to see it. Green. Live. These cameras had been running a long time, long enough for that elderberry to grow around the relay and claim it as part of the wall, long enough for the cables to oxidize to near match with the wood, long enough for the mounting clips to disappear under 8 or 9 layers of paint. Long enough that I'd walked through this barn every morning for 2 years, walked directly underneath 3 cameras, and never looked up at the right angle once. I went back inside and cleared the rest of the hay. Under the stack in that 6x4 section, the original planks had been cut away and replaced with something else. 2 metal hatch doors, set flush with the floor. Heavy steel, dark oxide finish, the kind of surface treatment that doesn't rust but doesn't shine either, just holds its gray indefinitely. The hinges on my side were oversized and engineered for repeated loading, rated for weight they'd never need to bear from this direction. Along the seam between the 2 doors, there were marks. I crouched and ran my fingers along them. Pressure marks, the kind that come from force applied from below, repeatedly over a long span of time. Not scratches. The steel itself had deformed, millimeter by millimeter under sustained load. No visible lock on my side. I took hold of both handles. They were recessed flush, the kind you hook your fingers under. Cold enough to feel through my gloves. I held them for a moment, not pulling, just holding. Then I lifted. The sound cut, not muffled, not reduced. Cut. 1 second, the barn had all its sounds. The structure settling against the wind, the boards creaking at the eave line, the pigeons in the gap on the west side, my own breathing. Then they were gone. All of them. At once. The silence that replaced them wasn't quiet the way an empty room is quiet. It had a texture to it. A pressure you felt behind your ears, the way depth feels underwater. Then the cold. Not a draft, not a current moving through the opening. Something that rose from below the way heat rises. Slow and sustained, pushing up through the column of open air, coming from depth. Not the cool of a cellar or a root cellar. A root cellar is just earth that hasn't seen sun. This was something from below the frost line, below the water table, from wherever the shaft reached. It had no moisture to it, no organic smell, just cold. It came up around my knees and kept rising, and I crouched there and felt it move up my chest and reach my face and hands. I shone the flashlight down. Earth walls, rough cut, the tool marks still pressed into the soil from whoever dug this out. Long parallel scrapes from something wide-bladed, and between them the soil compressed smooth. 4 feet across, perfectly vertical. A shaft, not a pit. The beam lit the first 15 or 20 feet cleanly. After that, it faded. The shaft just kept going, further than the flashlight had the reach for. No bottom visible, no ladder, no iron rungs set into the walls, no rope, no platform, nothing to grab or stand on. Nothing to suggest anyone had ever been meant to go down or to come back up. I held the light steady and waited for my eyes to adjust. They did. It didn't help, and looking into it too long did something uncomfortable to my sense of scale. I stayed crouched at the edge of those open doors longer than I meant to. Then the feeling came. No sound, no sight. I closed the hatches, lowered them back carefully, setting them flush, making sure the seam aligned. Stood up, checked the barn. Gerald's truck along the north wall. The bales I'd moved, stacked to one side. The flat bars of morning light across the floor where the door stood open. Nothing else. I was alone. I walked back to the house. Gravel under my boots, the kitchen door, old wood and coffee grounds. I poured out the cold coffee, which had been sitting since 6 a.m., and made fresh and sat at the kitchen table with my hands around the mug and stayed there a while. That evening, a vehicle came down the drive. Dark sedan, county plates. The county sheriff got out. Not a deputy, the man himself. He was older than I'd remembered. He came straight across the yard without looking around, like he'd made up his mind about what he was going to say before he got out of the car. He didn't come inside, stood at the door and looked at me. Not angry, not alarmed, tired. The expression of a man delivering news he'd hoped he wouldn't have to deliver. "We saw you," he said. "Don't ever do that again." I asked who else was watching. He said that wasn't my concern. I asked what was down there. He said, "Leave it." He was already moving back toward his car when he said it. Not rushing, but not lingering either. And he didn't look toward the barn once, not when he pulled up, not while he stood at my door. He kept his eyes on me the entire time. I noticed that after he was gone, I stood in the doorway and watched his taillights until the road bent and took them out of sight. The night was cold and still, no wind. Somewhere in the south field, something moved through the dry grass, a deer probably, or the wind picking up in that one spot the way it does along the creek edge. I stood there after the sound stopped. Then I went inside. Gerald kept his papers in the basement. 2 filing cabinets, dark green metal, and 12 boxes stacked in rows along the east wall, untouched for 2 years since the funeral. The morning after the sheriff's visit, I went down. The basement smells like old concrete and damp paper and the slow rust of the water heater. 1 bare bulb on a pull chain, 60 watts. The light it throws is orange and directional. Enough to work by if you're patient. I went through everything. Equipment warranties, some for machines sold before I was old enough to drive. Service records going back to the 70s. Tax returns in their year-labeled folders, Gerald's handwriting on every tab. Receipts for seed and feed and diesel and parts for equipment I don't even have names for anymore. Gerald kept everything, every document anyone had handed him, every carbon copy, every receipt the thickness of onion skin. 3 hours in that basement gave me a complete picture of his finances, which matched what I already knew. He'd managed, barely, nothing left over. In the 4th box, in a folder marked Property in his handwriting behind the deed and the survey map, I found the letter. County Sheriff's letterhead, typed on a machine, the key strikes slightly uneven in the way of old typewriters where some keys hit harder than others. The O darker than the surrounding characters, the lowercase e a fraction high. Dated July 14th, 1979. I read it quickly, then sat down on the nearest box and read it again slowly. The monitoring arrangement currently in place on the property would continue under new ownership. The equipment was not to be interfered with. If there was any sign of unusual activity, from the land, the livestock, the equipment, or anything pertaining to the structure in the northeast corner of the main barn, the new owner was to call the number at the bottom of the page without delay. Under no circumstances was he to investigate the equipment's function independently. At the bottom, Gerald R. Harlan, his full name in his handwriting, a date 6 months after he bought the farm. Gerald signed this 6 months into owning the land. He farmed above whatever is in that hatch for the next 40 years. He sat at the kitchen table I still sit at, ate at it, spread seed catalogs across it, fell asleep in the chair beside it on winter evenings, and for 40 years he carried whatever he knew about what was in the floor of his own barn. He never told me. Never told anyone I know of. I looked at the number at the bottom. 7 digits, old local format. I called it. 4 rings, a recording. The number was no longer in service. I tried the next morning with the phone closer to the window in case I'd misread a digit. Same recording. I wrote it in my notebook anyway. The farm ledger was in the 2nd cabinet. 30+ years of Gerald's handwriting, feed costs, yields, equipment repairs, weather notes when weather mattered to the record. His handwriting got slightly smaller over the decades, more compressed. I went through it, page by page. On 3 pages, 1983, 1991, 2007. The columns were interrupted. Notes in the margin, his handwriting, no context. No explanation. Just the words in the space beside whatever routine entry he'd been making. A note to self that wasn't written for himself. Do not cut the feed. Written once, then kept going. The entries after each one are as orderly as the entries before. Yields, costs, weather. Whatever prompted each margin note left no other trace for whoever came next. I went back to the barn, climbed Gerald's aluminum ladder, the one with the cracked top step he'd taped over and never replaced. The tape had gone brittle and started to peel at the edges. I climbed past it carefully and looked at the underside of each camera, on each casing in white paint applied with a narrow brush. Do not cut the feed. Old. Flaking at the edges where the paint had cracked along the curves of the housing. But legible. Someone had taken care to keep it legible. The strokes were deliberate, the letters sized for reading from below. This wasn't a note, it was a sign. I held on to that ladder a long time. I had assumed the cameras were hidden from everyone, from Gerald included. That some agency had installed them without his knowledge, and Gerald had farmed here all his life without knowing what was watching his floor. But Gerald had found them. At some point in 40 years he'd climbed up here, probably on this same ladder, maybe this same cracked step, and seen what was mounted in his rafters. Then he'd gotten a narrow brush and a tin of white paint and put those 4 words on the underside of each one. Not for himself, he already knew. For whoever cleared that hay and looked up. For me. He didn't leave a note. Didn't take me aside before he died. And he had time to. He was sick for 8 months at the end, and I was here for most of it. Didn't find a way to say, Walt, before I go, there's something under the barn floor you need to know about. The only thing he left me was 4 words on equipment he must have prayed I would never find, in a space he must have hoped I'd never look. I thought about that up on that ladder for a long time. The cold coming down through the roof. The barn settling in the wind below me. Back in the basement, property folder going through it again. Behind the letter, further back than I'd reached the first time, a smaller envelope. Plain white, unsealed. Inside, photographs, printed on consumer photo paper. Some glossy, some matte. The older ones yellowed at the edges with the particular warm cast of printing chemistry from the early 80s, heavier stock, the image slightly soft from the limitations of the equipment. 14 total, dates written on the back in Gerald's handwriting, the same compressed print from the ledger. Every photograph showed the same thing. The northeast corner of my barn floor, the hatch doors centered in the frame, same angle, same framing. Across 30 years, Gerald had been photographing it every few years, a personal record kept separate from everything else, filed in an envelope, unsealed, as if he'd gone back to it regularly. I laid them in order and went through them slowly. 1981, the doors clean. Steel unmarked, the seam between them sharp and even, the oxide finish unbroken. 1987, marks along the left door near the center seam. Slight deformations, shallow, easy to miss if you weren't looking for change from the previous photograph. 1994, marks running the full length of the left door seam starting on the right. The deformation deeper, wider, not easy to miss now. 2003, both doors, consistent deformation across the full length of both seams. The steel had yielded along its full span, deep enough to be clearly visible in an average photograph with average light. 2018, 4 years before Gerald died, continuous deformation along nearly the entire seam on both doors. The steel had moved. What had been a manufacturing seam was now a line of sustained pressure, the metal itself recording the load in its surface the way wood records years. Something had been pushing up against those doors from below for the full span of Gerald's time on this land. Steady, growing. And he'd watched it happen, documented it in sequence, filed the photographs in order, and kept farming. Kept quiet. Fed the cattle and repaired the tractor and came in for dinner and sat at the kitchen table and said nothing. His signature at the bottom of an agreement he never explained. Not one word of explanation across any of them. Not one line describing what was down there or what the feed was or why it could not be cut. Just the instruction, repeated, without reason given. I called the county sheriff's office and asked to speak to someone about the arrangement on the Harlan property. Got transferred twice. A man told me someone would call back. I gave my number. No one called. I waited 3 days. I drove to the county records office. The clerk pulled the property file and found the 1979 letter, a copy of the one I already had, and handed it across the counter. I asked if there was any supporting documentation. Anything explaining what the arrangement covered, what authority had created it, who else was party to it. She went through the file carefully, took it to the back room, came out again. Nothing else in the file. Who would know more, I asked. She didn't know. I drove home. The afternoon going gray through the window, the light dropping, the room getting darker without me getting up to do anything about it. I can follow a rule that has a reason. I've done it my whole life. Rules I agreed with, rules I didn't, rules that cost me something real. A rule with a reason is something I can work with, something I can measure my situation against. A rule with no reason is a wall, and walls make me want to know what's on the other side. I had tried every avenue available to me. Dead monitoring number, no call back from the county, nothing in the records. The sheriff in my doorway telling me to leave it without telling me what it was. I gave myself one more day, slept badly, woke twice, lay there listening to the house, got up before light. In the morning, I went to the barn. I photographed everything before I touched it. The cameras, the cable runs along the beams, every path, every fastener, every painted over clip. The junction box opened from 3 angles, every terminal, every port, every cable labeled with tape and marker. The conduit path through the wall, the relay outside from 4 sides, every connection in the system, in sequence, in the order they'd need to be restored. Then I wrote it all down. Diagrams, which cable, which port, which terminal, the relay indicator switch position. If I needed to put this back exactly as I found it, I'd be able to. Then I took the utility knife off my belt. 3 cuts at the junction box. The cables were stiff, old insulation, the rubber gone slightly brittle. They parted cleanly. I put the knife away, sat on a hay bale facing the hatch, set my watch. 10 minutes. That was the deal I made with myself. 10 minutes of nothing and I'd reconnect everything, try a different approach. A lawyer, a formal records request, a written complaint. 10 minutes of nothing would tell me the warnings were empty, and empty warnings from a dead arrangement with a disconnected phone number deserve no more of my time. Minute 3. Nothing. Barn quiet and normal. The pigeon in the eave gap on the west side moving around. The structure settling with a slow tick against the cold outside. My own breath, visible in the March air. Minute 6. Nothing. The cold floor coming up through my boot soles the way it does in early spring, before the ground has warmed through. A car on the road to the east, distant, gone. Minute 8, my dog stood up. He'd been lying on his side in the doorway the way he does when I'm working inside, head on his paws, legs out. He didn't growl, didn't lift his head first and look around, didn't look toward the hatch or toward me. He simply put all 4 legs under him and stood, stiffly, the way old dogs stand when they've been on a hard floor, careful, deliberate, getting each leg settled before trusting weight to it. Then he walked out in the direction of the back fence, tail down. He didn't look back, didn't come back. Minute 10. I checked my watch. I breathed out. Let myself think. Nothing. Let myself start building the sentence about the next approach. Minute 13. My phone rang. Local number I didn't recognize. I picked up. 2 seconds of silence, not a dead line, not static. Silence with something present on the other end that wasn't speaking and wasn't mechanical. Then a sound, not a voice, not anything mechanical. Then the call dropped. 8 seconds total. Start to finish. I set the phone on my knee and looked at it. Minute 17. A siren, east of me, maybe a mile. Then a second from the southeast, further out. Then a third from a direction that didn't line up with either of the first two. I went inside, turned the kitchen radio on. Morning programming, nothing unusual. I checked my phone for county emergency alerts. Nothing. Back outside. 5 sirens now. Maybe 6. Different distances, different directions. My nearest neighbor's place is a 1/4 mile east. White house, red barn, a grain bin you can see the top of from my back field on a clear day. The lights were on. In the yard between the house and the barn there was a figure. I watched it for 30 seconds. The movement was wrong. Not the way a hurt person moves, guarding against pain. Not the way a frightened person moves, which is urgent and directional. Wrong in a way I had no name for then and still don't. It moved with purpose, with clear direction, toward something that wasn't there. And it stopped and moved again. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, put both hands flat on the surface. The sirens kept coming. I sat and counted separate sirens and then stopped being able to separate them. They had become a layer of sound surrounding this property on all sides at different distances. I got up and went back to the barn. I reconnected every cable, in order, exactly as I'd documented. My hands were not steady. I noticed that, registered it, kept working. One cable seated wrong on the first try, came off the terminal, had to reseat it, all 3 in. I powered the relay from the exterior switch, went outside and checked the indicator panel. Green. It wasn't fast enough. Not for Vesta Roan. The sheriff's vehicle came down my gravel drive fast enough to throw rock against the undercarriage. He was out before it fully stopped, crossing the yard in long strides with the car door swinging open behind him, and I had about 3 seconds before he reached me and took hold of my arm just above the elbow. "What have you done, for God's sake?" Not raised, controlled. He wasn't asking what I'd done. He already knew. 7 properties, 11 people, 25 minutes. Most of what I know comes from emergency services logs posted to the county records portal in the days after, and from the small amount the sheriff told me directly. Some became violent, not toward other people mostly, toward themselves, toward whatever was within reach. One woman put her hand through the glass panel on her kitchen door. 12 stitches, no memory of the act, no explanation when asked. Some stopped. Just stopped. Mid-task, wherever they were. A woman at her kitchen sink, cold water running over her hands, facing the wall above the faucet. Her breakfast dishes in the rack behind her. She had no memory of going to the sink. Some did things that were purposeful and directed and intentional. Went somewhere, did something, with a clarity of purpose they had no memory of once they came back. The emergency log used the word compelled in 2 separate entries from different responders who'd never spoken to each other. Most came back, confused mostly, headaches, gaps where the time had been. Vesta Roan was 71 years old. She'd farmed her property most of her adult life. She knew this land the way you only know it after decades, which field drains first, which slope catches frost late, where the water table is. Her land borders mine directly to the east. She was the figure I'd watched in the yard, moving wrong. Vesta didn't come back, not fully, not in the way the others mostly did. I'm not going to describe what I've been told about her condition. It isn't mine to put into words. She's alive. She's being cared for somewhere that isn't her farm, which she has worked every day for 50 years and will not be going back to. When I drive into town, I pass her house. The lights are off. The grain bins are full. Nobody's touched the fields. I slow down every time without deciding to. I don't stop. I haven't stopped yet. The sheriff spent close to an hour in my barn. He didn't ask me to come in. I stood in the yard in the cold with my hands in my jacket pockets and looked at Gerald's dark green truck through the open barn door and waited. I could hear him moving in there occasionally, the sound of the ladder at one point, then nothing for a long stretch. When he came out, he stood in the drive with his hands at his sides and looked at the gravel. I asked, "What is it?" He said, "Old." I asked, "How old?" He looked up. "Older than the farm. Older than the county. Older than anything we have a word for." "Is it contained?" I asked. "Yes," he said. I said, "When I went back in to reconnect the cables, the barn felt different. Not the cold from the hatch, something in the air of the whole space, the way a room feels when the pressure has changed. And standing above the hatch with the doors closed and the feed running, something was coming up through the floor that hadn't been there before. A quality to the silence from below, a weight to it, the sense of something on the other side of the steel that was pointing up, present in a way it hadn't been before I opened those doors." He looked at me for a moment, said he'd be in touch. He drove away. He hasn't been in touch. Dormant and contained are not the same thing. Before I cut the feed, the barn was just a barn. I walked through it every morning for 2 years and felt nothing except a barn. Smelled hay and oil and old wood. Gerald's truck along the wall, the tools on their hooks, the light the same as it's always been. The hatch was in the floor under the hay, and it was nothing, because whatever was below it was dormant. Not gone. Not harmless. Dormant. Whatever signal the cameras were pushing down through the closed doors was keeping it that way. I opened the hatch and something shifted. Not from cutting the signal. The signal was still running when I lifted those doors. Something about the opening itself, the removal of the physical barrier. Something below registered it, the change in what was above it. Then I cut the feed and it woke fully. I reconnected in under 10 minutes from the first siren. The signal came back on. The containment is restored, technically. The sheriff said yes when I asked, and I believe he was telling me the truth, as far as yes extends. But when I stood in that barn after reconnecting, the barn was not what it had been that morning. I can't point to what specifically was different. Same air, same light, same truck against the north wall. But something below the floor was awake in a way it hadn't been that morning, and I could feel it without being able to say what I was feeling. It doesn't make sound. It doesn't push at the hatch. It's just there now, in a way it wasn't before. The cameras keep it below. They cannot put it back to sleep. That's done. I woke it. It is awake now, and it will stay awake, and there is nothing to be done about that. That's what I did. I don't know how many weeks it's been. I stopped counting around week 4. I've been finding notes in my handwriting I don't remember writing, on the kitchen table in the morning, on the back of the notebook I keep by the door, once on the workbench in the barn, which means I was out there at night and have no memory of going. They're short lines, no dates, no context, no explanation for why I wrote them down. My handwriting, my pen. Can't finish meals. Woke at the window. Stood in the barn. Don't know how long. Checked the cameras. Don't remember checking them. I know what those mean. I watched 11 people go through the beginning of this. I was the one standing in his yard watching while it started for them, while they did things they couldn't account for with intention they couldn't recall. I know what comes after the short lines, putting this down now because in a few days I may not be able to. If you find this, here's what matters. The cameras in the northeast rafters are not decorative. Do not cut the cables. Do not touch the relay on the exterior south wall. Do not touch the junction box inside. The feed stays on. If you want to know what happens when it goes off for more than 10 minutes, you've already read it. That was less than 30 minutes worth. The hatch stays closed. The monitoring number from the 1979 letter, property folder, basement, bottom box, third from the left, is disconnected. I have no working contact to give you. The county sheriff knows about the arrangement. His name is on the building. Try him first. If he sends you away, keep trying. Go above him, go to the county directly, get a name in writing. Don't let them make you go away. My father, Gerald Harlan, kept this for 40 years. He photographed the hatch every year, filed the photographs in order, stenciled the cameras, signed the agreement, and said nothing out loud to anyone. Not to the county, not to his neighbors, not to me. He got it exactly right for 40 years. Then he died and left it to me, and I destroyed it in 3 weeks. I'm recording this because his method was silence, and silence failed. Someone is going to find this land after me. If they find it the way I found it, a dead monitoring number, a letter in a box, his handwriting on the cameras, they'll do what I did. They'll want to know why. They'll run out of channels. They'll give themselves 10 minutes. The cameras watch the hatch. The hatch covers a shaft. The shaft goes down further than a flashlight reaches. What's below that floor is awake now. Before March, it was dormant. The signal the cameras pushed down kept it that way for as long as they've been running. I cut the feed for 23 minutes and changed that permanently. The signal is back. The cameras are running. The containment is restored. The cameras cannot put it back to sleep. I check the relay indicator every morning before anything else. Green means the signal is running. Green means one more day. I don't know who inherits this after me. If it's you, the feed stays on. Do not cut the feed. Hey guys, Rex here. Just wanted to drop a quick personal note at the end of this one. YouTube isn't exactly a huge fan of this kind of mature psychological horror and have unfortunately demonetized the channel. It's frustrating, but I love creating these videos for you all and I want to keep them going. I went ahead and created a Ko-fi, so if you've got a couple of bucks to spare and want to support the channel directly, the link is down in the description. It is totally optional, so please don't feel obligated. Just watching the videos to the end, leaving a comment, and subscribing helps more than you know. Thank you guys so much for the support, and stay safe out there.